Hi again, everyone. This is Mark from people I spoke to and some comments, and it's kind of an interesting topic because not a lot of people talk about it so much on video, and so I think that's why there was some interest. The Most of the things that people asked me about was, how to make games, but then the next thing is really like how much money do you make in mobile games, or how much money can be made in mobile games, especially on iPhone. So this video today focuses more on iPhone than Android, and later I'll do a more specific one on Android because those are two separate markets right now. And I think it's better just to sort of keep it specific, and then you guys who are interested in iPhone development can know a little bit more about the revenue of it. So, I think as I mentioned last time, the iPhone market itself is very top heavy in terms of the revenue. So the fact is that the top the top players, say like in the top 100, will make most of the revenue on the App Store, and I think that's probably the same with most industries out there. But that's something to be aware of. So when we do hear about success stories and revenue on the App Store, it's generally comes from those top 10, or top 100 players that are really making big hit games, and they've got a lot of visibility and a lot of players downloading the game. On the revenue side of things, I'm going to give some examples in a moment, but just for all those beginners out there, whenever you sell, say, a $1 application or a $1 microtransaction, Apple takes 30%, so you get your 70 cents after that, okay? So, and the other thing is roughly on the ad revenue as well, if you have ads in the game. Say, for example, I think iAds and then also AdMob, they will also take 30% of that revenue as well. So if you do ask anybody else out there how much revenue you're making, then ask them, what is the revenue to you after the cut from Apple and maybe AdMob or some other advertising network. So, I think for us on our side, we started really low in terms of like revenue. I actually remember the first day when we released our first game, and I was kind of excited because I had read a lot of stories. And I think one of the stories I had read was about a developer who had made a kind of flashlight game using the LED light on the back of an iPhone, and it was like that story was everywhere, he made like $1,800 in one day. So, and that was just a flashlight application. I thought, my God, we'll be millionaires within a few weeks. And I think a lot of people kind of fall into that, not trap, but that way of thinking. And so the first day we released the game, and my heart kind of sunk. The first day we made 1 cent, just 1 cent. I want to do a presentation on that someday, and hopefully I'll get a big laugh out of it. The second day was roughly 2 or 3 cents. Over the course of 1 year and 3 months, that's gradually increased and increased and increased. So I think the main point there is just don't be too hung up if things don't go well with your first release or your first game or your first application. Keep going, keep pushing it, keep marketing, keep getting users, and building a community around the games as well. There's some really successful examples out there, and I'm going to talk about these a little bit. For example, Vegas Towers. I can't remember the name of the developer now, but that's a pretty cool game, kind of similar to Tiny Tower. You have to build a Vegas hotel, and that was done by 2 to 3 people. And they had 1 million downloads within sort of, I think, 2 to 3 months or something like that, and they were having a 3% conversion. So 3% of their players who downloaded the game were buying at least a 99 cents in-app purchase. I've not done the math in my head, but that's pretty good. Having a 3% conversion rate is very, very, very good. And I think Tiny Tower had roughly 5% conversion rate. So those are high-end games in terms of the success. They're developed by small teams that have really done a lot of polish on these games. Tiny Tower more than Vegas Towers, but it's, again, those successes are kind of few and far between compared to the number of developers there are on the iPhone App Store. So obviously things like, I'm going to talk about the revenue in a second on Tiny Tower, but I'm not going to give you so much, revenue of Angry Birds here, as I mentioned, because everyone knows Angry Birds, and it's a kind of it's a 1 in a billion kind of hit, which is very, very hard to replicate. So we need to know kind of realistic figure of how much a small independent game developer can make on the iPhone App Store. So, but the point I just wanted to highlight here is with Rovio, the developers of Angry Birds, I read that they made 54 or 55 games for Angry Birds, and those games did so-so, but it was the 55th game that was, exploded. It was the game that was the big hit, the big success. So my point in that is just keep going, keep going, keep going. If you're generating some revenue and it feels kind of low, just keep going. You're going to learn. It's one day you might just hit one game and it's going to explode, and then focus on that game. So, and I think that's what Rovio does now. They spend most of their time and most of their development efforts just on Angry Birds. So, like I said, on the first day we actually made 1 cent, just 1 cent, and my heart kind of dropped. That just had ad revenue. That was just from ad revenue. There was no in-app purchase inside of the first game that we released like 1 year and 3 months ago. And, it slowly went up over then and kind of averaged out at that point. So the most recent game that we made called Killer Shooting Sniper X on iPhone, that was also released on Android as well. But specifically on iPhone, and the in-app purchases that we make each day are not massive. The game hasn't been heavily marketed. Just on average, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking now over the past day, sorry I didn't write this down here, I think that roughly makes around $15 a day on in-app purchases. About $15 each day on in-app purchases. And, in terms of ad revenue, that might be around $8 to $10 each day. That game was not heavily marketed. That game was developed by just myself, as in programming and artwork, and it was developed in roughly, I don't know, let's say, I think it was roughly seven man days. So if I was to work 7 days straight, I would have got the game finished. But it took about 2 weeks because there was things in between and days off and half days and so on. So considering that game wasn't really marketed, it didn't have a publisher, it was just me, that's not too bad. Obviously that's not massive, and it wouldn't work for a full game development studio, and it wouldn't work as a single game on its own. But we have now 15 games in the market through our studio, Cobalt Play. But that took time, of course, and to reach that skill level as well for new developers takes time. But I can develop games fairly fast now, and with that similar level of success with having X amount of games in the market, you guys, if you are independent developers, you can definitely, reach a kind of average living cost salary and then bring that higher over time, generate a good player base, generate a lot of viral talk about your game as well. So, that's just to give you a concrete example of us. I had a friend who recently built a game, and I think it cost around €20,000, something like that. And that was a team of 4 or 5 developers, full-time, expensive, I believe. Well, €22,000 is expensive. But those guys, I think, made in 2 months $450, something like that. And that's their first game. And this is open information. They've made those figures public as well. So that just kind of goes to show the kind of risk as well. But with a first game, of course, it's going to be a little bit more. It's not going to have, say, as much polish in terms of monetization. So there's a lot of lessons learned there as well. A friend of mine in the French App Store reached position number 1, and I think every day they were making about $100 of in-app purchases. I can't remember actually if the game was a paid game or if it was in-app purchases, but to reach the number 1 spot in the French App Store and make only $100 a day with a full studio is not good. You can't pay for a studio with $100 a day, of course. If you are 2 guys sitting doing this independently, $100 a day, you probably can do that, on a single game. That's not bad. You guys can build up from that point. So it's just to sort of make sure that your expectations are kind of met and not getting too pulled in with the big expectations of, wow, this game made $1 million in a day, and that's what we're going to do as well. And not to discourage you guys as well, I say go for it 110%, but just make sure you have all your monetization strategy in place, you know, and you guys can always ask me on that stuff, about that stuff as well. Another friend of mine, I hear this story quite a lot from developers, is they would like to get in the iPhone App Store because they believe it, because they've heard it makes a lot of money. And it does, no doubt. A lot of money goes through the iPhone App Store, and a lot of people make transactions every single day there. And there's obviously big money involved when Apple's doing its presentations. So, but my friend released one on the App Store the first day. It was a paid application. The first day it made $8, and then $4, then $2, then $1, and then maybe $1 every 3-4 days. And I think possibly for the mass majority of game developers out there, that's the case. I think for a lot of the independent, smaller developers, that's the case. Independent, smaller developers don't generally go out and write stories online and blogs about how much money they made, and we don't often see that in the news. You know, I don't read about on PocketGamer.biz. I don't read about the guy who lives in, you know, Germany, who's 18 and built an app and it didn't do very well, and it made $1 a day or something. You know, we don't read about that stuff. We read about the big ones. So I think keep it all in perspective. You know, compared to the small number of successes compared to the big number of developers who have had sort of mediocre or lower success, or perhaps average success. Another example is a friend of mine who I spoke to a while back. He has a studio here in Shanghai, and they made a game that took around 6 weeks, but they didn't recoup their money even after 4 months. And I think that was done with roughly 1 to 2 developers, 1 programmer, 1 artist, or possibly 2 developers, 1 artist. So, and that was one version was a free version, and the other version was a paid version. So there was an upsell. But they didn't recover their money for roughly 4 months. That's what I heard last, and that was a while ago. So, let me just catch up where I am on my points here. Yeah, so like I said, the big successes are kind of discussed in the media a lot, and I'm going to pull up some of these here. And this was just some quick research that I did today. You know, you guys, please take a note of these websites here, and then take a look for yourselves and read in more detail. But for example, 100,000 iOS games on the higher end of the revenue can earn like $3 million in a month. So $3 million in a month. That's for the high end ones. That's the ones that are in first position, second position, third. Like Dragonvale, Zynga, Tapfish, Angry Birds, Fruit Ninja, and so on. Of course, bearing in mind though that these studios, say like Zynga, do have huge overheads as well. Of course, they don't just have game development staff. They have legal departments, HR. Accounting, rent for offices, and so on. So, obviously they are making profit, but it's not as big as that revenue number that we're seeing right there. So, I always feel kind of good as a smaller independent developer with very low overheads making okay money. So, I think and mentioned here, like one could expect $40,000 in revenue after Apple's cut per day, which is excellent. But again, it comes down to like the team size and how long they stay in that top position. But $40,000 in one day, I think you're going to be pretty good, even if you've got a fairly decent sized studio. Maybe a team of 5 to 10 people or something like that. So I'll find another example here. This page was really good. I found this one this was on Tiny Tower, and I think this was the net monthly revenue was calculated to be roughly $260,000 per month. Now, this wasn't done by Nimblebit. This was the developers of Tiny Tower. This was done by a third-party guy who actually spoke to them, I believe. But this is a really good breakdown, so definitely check out this link here. And I'll post these in the description as well, guys, later on, so you can just click away and go to them directly. But $260,000 a month, and I think that was in the early stages of Tiny Tower. That's not now. This was sort of from mid-2011.